Today's episode is brought to you by Media for All, which was set up to help encourage more Black, Asian, and other ethnic talent into media, and to provide a support and mentoring network to ensure talent flourishes in the media industry that we all love. If you're looking for a mentor or would like to mentor young ethnic talent, check them out at mediaforall.org.uk, and it is all 100% free.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. This is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing one of our industry's leaders. And this week is no different. I'm very happy to be on a Zoom call with Adam Nickson, who's head of marketing comms at Groupe Renault. Adam, for those of the audience who didn't see you on Advertisers Watching Ads the other week, could you give the audience a bit of an overview of who you are and what you do?
Hey Tom, yeah, sure, no problem at all, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So as you said, my name's Adam Nickson. I'm head of marketing communications for Groupe Renault here in the UK. So effectively, that is all the brands that sit under Groupe Renault. So it's Renault, it's Dacia, it's our commercial vehicles, so vans, but also Alpine, which is a brilliant French sports car brand, which is having a brilliant renaissance at the moment, actually, as a new brand into the UK market. So that's kind of where I am at the moment, responsible for all the communications outputs that sit across those brands within the shores of the UK market. I guess, I'm a bit of backstory, I guess. I'm a bit of an accidental marketer, I think, a relatively unorthodox route into the industry that we find ourselves in. I actually wanted to be a policeman many years ago when I was going through school and going through college. I wanted to be a forensic scientist, and unfortunately didn't quite get the grades that I wanted to get. So I had to look for alternatives. But I think there's some parallels between that, what I wanted to do and what I wanted to do now, and I think that's really trying to get under the skin of people and what makes people tick. I think that's probably the parallels I try and draw between the two things. So I think probably at the age of 18, I thought marketing's actually something that does look interesting, and popped myself off to university and studied marketing and never really looked back. So I guess that's the sort of that's my initial step into the industry. From there, I did a little bit of work in London. I worked at several different agencies, mainly below the line CRM data agencies. And at that time, it was about 2000, 2001, and it was really tricky to get my first kind of inroad into the world of marketing. I think I hauled myself around pretty much every creative agency, ad agency, digital agency, which were just starting up at the time, trying to get my role. And I think once you do that, then obviously you've got a few weeks or months or years experience under your belt. And I sort of, I guess, started from there really. And I moved client side probably 10, 15 years ago. And I mentioned I'm sort of an accidental marketer. I'm probably an accidental car guy as well, to be honest with you. I've done a little bit of work for Dyson. I was at Dyson for 5 or 6 years as my first sort of client side role, and from there then moved into the car industry, from Jaguar to Hyundai to now at Renault. So I've sort of I guess my career's been built on a number of moments where I've flipped into marketing, and then at the same time, I guess, flipped into the car industry. But the industry I'm in at the moment is something that certainly interests me a lot. I think it's one of those. Yeah, sorry, Tom. Cool.
Yeah, so in that journey, and
Yeah.
I love the accidental marketer. Nice title for a book. What are the books that you've read? Have you, because you've studied, so you've had an academic beginning, which is pretty rare for this industry actually, and also for this podcast. But what have been those key books for you over the years that you would always recommend to your team or buy as gifts or recommend most often?
I think, I've got to be honest, I do struggle with a lot of marketing books. I've got no problem with reading, but I struggled sometimes to stay interested, to be honest with you. I think some of them perhaps are a little bit too theoretical and too dry. So I've sort of worked my way around quite a few books in recent weeks and months, one of which was Tom Goodwin's book, Digital Darwinism, which I thought was a really good read. But I think the one that I would probably recommend is slightly different from that. It's by a guy called Bob Hoffman, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with or the listeners are familiar with. Which is called Marketers Are From Mars, Consumers Are From New Jersey, which is, I guess, really an inside story of kind of how the industry works and almost some of the kind of foibles and oddities that we have within our industry, really pointing out the difference between actual customers who buy things or buy services or buy goods from us and the difference perhaps that marketers have on their perspective. So it almost drives a bus between the concept of people that work in the industry versus the people that we try and target with our communications or our products. And there's 101 different stories in there, which are quite funny anecdotes, short reads, but it's quite an inspiring kind of light-hearted look at the world that we work in, and some of the crazy things that we have to do sometimes,
And which of those stories from that book do you remember most well?
Yeah, I think there's a few in there. I think there's one in there about second screening. The concept of people now being sort of always on their phone when the ad break comes. And actually, his theory is actually sometimes it's the other way around. People are watching TV and the phone is a sort of second screen rather than the other way around. But there's one particularly that tickles me every time I read it, and it's the story of pickles. Pickles in a jar, and I presume it's a made-up story, but it could easily be true. There's a guy who's a planner in an agency, and his auntie calls him and says, "Look, you work in marketing, you know a thing or two about it. People are starting to like my pickles. I want to turn it into a company." And he turns around and says, "Well, what's your brand purpose? What's your kind of brand ethos?" And she said, "Well, I kind of make pickles, and people quite like them. And well, we need to come up with your brand values." And she's like, "Well, could that be good pickles?" The answer to every question is about good pickles. But it's just quite a funny story of how he tries to kind of mesmerize his great auntie or his grandma or something about kind of how you need to think about a brand ethos and a purpose and values and the kind of how, why, and what for her pickle company, when all she's really interested in is making good pickles that the neighbors like. And I kind of just like the kind of the split story of that, if you like. It kind of I guess it pokes a bit of fun at our industry to a certain extent, but it always highlights to me that there's real people out there who are buying our products or our services. And sometimes perhaps, I'm all for planning, but sometimes maybe we sort of overthink it perhaps a little bit sometimes.
And it's interesting to hear you mention Tom Goodwin, who's been on the podcast a couple of times.
Yeah.
And something he said recently, actually on Advertisers Watching Ads, was that brands hire agencies to help them represent the consumer. That's the agency's job. It's like about real people better than we do. That's why we pay you to make sure that the ideas are good and correct. But yet all too often there's still a huge disconnect between agencies and the real world. Like if you're only ever doing if you're only ever looking at everything from an agency lens, then that I can understand that pickle story becoming very true. It's interesting to hear you quote Tom as well. But so I'm really keen to know about what are those bad recommendations that you hear in the industry, or what are those bits of advice that you've heard over the years that you just think, no, that was nonsense?
I've got one here that may or may not resonate. Hopefully it will, but it's something that's probably, I think, to a certain extent on the wane. I think it's one of those things that probably 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 years ago was pretty prevalent, and I'm hoping it's sort of on the decline, because it used to drive me crackers, to be honest with you. But it's the words "stick it on social." I think it's probably a phrase I've heard more often than I can probably remember over the years that I've been working, where every time you create a piece of content, every time you create a TV ad, every time you do some behind the scenes footage or a customer service video where you've got B-roll footage, I'd hear from somebody in a meeting, "We can pop that on social. We can whack it on social. We can stick it on social," as if social was some kind of audio visual dumping ground for every asset you can ever imagine, almost like an internal library of stuff, and I think that was probably the one thing that I've noticed over my career, certainly since social media and the platforms have started to kind of take a bigger role in the stuff that we do, was just that almost throwaway view that they're a place where we can pop some stuff and people may or may not engage with it. And I think to a certain extent that's disappeared a little bit now. But certainly in my last sort of 5 or 10 years, I think it's something that's been a sort of a recommendation or a piece of advice that I've desperately tried to kind of avoid. It sort of struck, you see that kind of old black and white footage of kind of films, and there's fellas shoveling coal into a steam engine to make it go faster. I kind of felt like social was one of those steam engines, and people were just creating content and finding things that they could basically whack on social, as if the more the better was probably the way forward. And I do think that's on the turn now. It's definitely a phrase I hear less, in meetings and on shoots and things now, that we'll just do a cut down for social. it sort of feels like social's become a bit more of a primary platform or primary environment to talk to people and engage people. But I think that's something that certainly over the last 5 or 10 years has felt very secondary, as if everything we do has just got a place, you know?
I wonder if it will come full circle where it's like, right, we need to nail this 3-second GIF for TikTok. And yeah, we'll do like a long form thing. We'll just stick that on TV, you know.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be funny? I mean, it could do, you never know. It could do. It's definitely changed. I don't know if that's something you've noticed, but certainly it's something that I have. I think there was a drive for kind of volume of stuff rather than quality of stuff. Not necessarily thinking about the audience, the journey, where are we taking it? What do we want to try and do with it? And I think there's obviously brands now that are built on social and built on digital without having to, you know, use kind of traditional analog or kind of traditional channels, I guess. So it's definitely on the change, but it's just something that tickled me, I think, probably earlier in my career. And it's something I've always tried to avoid. I think, you know, brands are tending to do it a lot better now in terms of looking at their audiences, looking at segmentation, almost treating social as a place where sort of TV, I think, meets CRM to a certain extent. You've got all the kind of excitement of audio visual and getting under the skin of people with good content, but actually with the ability to do proper targeting, proper tailor messaging, proper kind of laser focusing on what you want to talk about and driving people to an immediate call to action. So I think social is super powerful. I just want to make sure that the content that people put through it is good and strong and has the purpose it's set out to do, rather than just being a dumping ground for every asset you can imagine, you know. But I think it's on the change.
So if that's the worst advice that you've heard over the years, what's the best advice? What's your top marketing tip that you recount the most or has had a longest impression on you?
This is probably one that I actually heard or learned on my first day at work ever. So I did a placement year when I was at university, a gap year, an organized one. It wasn't just a year out. And I sort of walked in on my first day, sort of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and probably wearing a crap ill-fitting suit, you know, kind of just not looking the part. But I got a job in an agency up in Manchester where I was from at the time. And the guy who I was kind of reporting into on my first day said to me, he was sort of quizzing me a little bit on marketing. And he said, do you know about the 4 Ps of marketing? And I said, yeah, you know, sort of nodded. And yeah, I've read about that. It's been in all the textbooks and stuff. And he said, well, what about the 6 Ps? And I sort of scratched my head and he said, do you know about the 6 Ps of marketing? And I said, no, I'm not familiar with that concept. So I kind of went home that night and leafed through my marketing textbooks to find the 6 Ps and couldn't find anything in there that referenced the 6 Ps. And I came in the next day to work and looked pretty confused. And the words that he said next really, really stuck with me. He said the 6 Ps, and excuse my profanities, he said the 6 Ps are piss poor planning means piss poor performance. And I was like, no wonder I couldn't find it in the textbook. But there was something about that phrase of piss poor planning is piss poor performance just really made me feel actually there's something really, really interesting about the work that we do. And I think probably at that point I'd thought marketing was probably about making stuff, you know. It was about shiny objects and shiny ads and kind of, you know, macaroni and glitter. It was like art, you know. And I think that was the first time that he sort of put in my brain that there was actually a bit more science behind it than just the art, you know. It was kind of a meeting of 2 different disciplines and understanding there's customers at the end of what we do, you know, who we want to believe something, feel something, do something, action something. They might have a problem that we can help them fix. You know, there's all that kind of stuff that I hadn't really thought about, to be honest with you. I'd kind of, at that point, thought marketing was mainly about just, you know, making shiny assets. And I think that was probably my initial appeal. But, you know, I think as soon as I'd heard that phrase, that 6 Ps, it really stuck with me. And it's something I've tried to just instill in what we do, is that planning is so important behind everything we do. I think you can overplan, but it's super important.
And so how have you seen that evidenced in your career, either in this role or previous roles? Like, can you tell me about a time when you got the planning right or you got the planning wrong, and where the 6 Ps really came into effect?
I think the one I'd probably reference the most is probably a recent campaign I've done with Renault 18 months or so ago, which was about the launch of the Renault Clio. I think you actually kindly featured it on Advertisers Watching Ads, I think probably in the summertime, maybe 6 months or so ago. And it was about how do we engage people with a new product that we've got, and how do we kind of re-articulate the story of Clio and make it mean something in the UK. And the concept we came up with was the kind of English-French love affair and the kind of the relationship we've had. And we articulated that through the creative articulation was really nice, done with one of our agencies in terms of telling the story of the Renault Clio over the last 30 years through the eyes of two school friends who went on a French exchange, and the kind of the love story, same-sex love story that developed as part of that process. But the insight was really about actually the product has played a role in certainly people my age, Generation X, who learned to drive probably in the 90s, was really tapping into something that they recall about Clio being a part of their kind of youth and part of their growing up and becoming adults. And really that was the story we tried to reflect, and really just tapping into that kind of really human insight, which I think to a certain extent, I don't really want to diss the industry I'm in, but it's relatively rare, I think, for a car company or a car brand to do that. Normally it's about, here's a car, it's available at this price, and it's got some new technology or whatever, So actually to take a step back and look at the human insight behind it for us was super important.
And of course, it was a winner at the Advertising Awards as well. That we also got double featured on
yes,
AWA. So
it did. Thank you.
Great bit of work. This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. At the halfway stage now, so we are going to talk about your shiny new object, and you've done a first for the podcast, which is a listicle, really, which is a New Year marketing detox. So can you tell the audience what that is and why it's your shiny new object?
Yeah, of course, Tom. Yeah, so I've had a sort of long and hard think about this, and obviously we're just recording this after the Christmas period, so a bit of a detox felt like a good thing to do as we step into the new year. And obviously at the start of 2021, it's a new year probably that like no other we've had before. And I don't want to get too down in the dumps about it, but obviously there's challenges in the year ahead. So I've tried to think in my sort of 5-step detox, if you like, about 5 different behaviors as part of that detox process, which will hopefully, I guess, see me through, and maybe some other marketers who are listening to this, see me through 2021 in terms of behaving in certain ways or doing certain things that will actually start to, I guess, kickstart business a little bit for us, I guess, in what's probably quite a turbulent year. So a positive outlook on something that's probably a little bit down in the dumps, but how can we start to kind of, I guess, turn 2021 and do some key things that will see us through the next 12 months is probably the reason why I've come up with that.
Right. So let's have it.
All right. So I think, I was sort of thinking about why is it important? And, I know from my own personal experience that, I've sort of, media budgets and all budgets for the following year will be at a premium, right? So we're all going to have to be a bit more efficient with the things that we do. We're going to have to do the things that are important, and probably try and harvest some of the things that are least important. So it was really about starting to look at what those things might be. I read an article actually over Christmas about the 42 things that every marketer must do in 2021 to avoid being left behind. And I'd sort of written my list of kind of what do I need to do in 2021, and there wasn't 42 things on it, but the article I read was about 42 things that avoids everyone being left behind. And in there was a lot of the things you would probably expect, everything from kind of more personalization to mobile to pixels to automation to chatbots, programmatic, visual search, a renaissance of the QR code. There was lots of stuff on that list that I read, but what struck me actually there was not too much on that list that was of an actual benefit to a customer. There was a lot of things on there that was a benefit to a marketing person in terms of how do we target people, how do we engage people, but nothing much that actually got people super excited, that would actually get under people's skin. So that's probably why I've tried to sort of focus in on the things that that I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. But I think for me, the first part of the sort of detox that I'm going to try and do for 2021 is to be exciting. And I was thinking, when was the last time a brand of any category really did something that got under my skin, When was it what can I remember, what can I recall off the top of my head of something that a brand did that got my got me going, made me laugh, made me cry, gave me goosebumps, kind of made me excited. And I think those moments are becoming few and far between. We're sort of doing more stuff as an industry, but probably less of it as a customer. If I put myself in my customer's shoes, probably less of that stuff excites me than perhaps it ever has done before. So I think there's probably an opportunity for 2021 for the brands that will sort of step out of their comfort zone and be a little bit more exciting in the things that they do, that obviously align to their purpose, their values, but actually try and make people have an emotion, a response back, rather than just a response being a click or a like or a share or a digital moment. And I think really it's about focusing on creativity and ideas, not just channels. On that list of 42 things, it was very much channel focused or tactic focused. But I want to try and, I guess, work with ideas first and the tactics at the same time, so we can really start to kind of just turn that emotion into action. I think the brands that can do that will probably survive the most, really. The brands that can engage people, but also use digital tactics, digital channels to try and turn that kind of excitement into an action or a behavior. So I think that's probably the first one I want to try and do, is just be exciting, stand out. Brilliant. Be exciting, and get under people's skin.
I'm gonna let you just rattle through this list, Adam, and then I'll come back with questions at the end.
Yeah, sure.
A strong start.
Second one was really about creating experiences. I think, we're all sick of lockdown. We've just gone into lockdown 3 or 4 or 5. I can't quite remember which one it is, but I think really it's about how can we connect with people on a human level, which sounds very obvious, but I've only seen the same 4 people in my house for the last 2 weeks without seeing anybody else. So how can brands start to bridge that kind of journey and take people with them on a more of an experiential level as we come out of a lockdown period? So I think it's super important in my industry. It's super important in every industry in terms of how do we bridge that journey and take people on a get people back out of their houses and provide them with something that's going to excite them. So whether that's through money can't buy, whether that's about bringing brand purpose to life in kind of physical spaces, whether that's about brand partnerships. And I've seen some of the work that people like North Face have done with Gucci, which kind of excites me. Whether that's through digital experiences, in our industry, things like life-size configurators or VR. How can we start to just get people out of their houses and into an environment that kind of motivates them to do something, and sort of dusts off that internalness that we're all probably feeling at the moment. So that would be point number 2. Point number 3 is probably quite a big one, actually, and that's about clarity. I think when I look around at the industry we're in at the moment, I think one of the things that we suffer from is a lack of clarity in the things that we do and the language that we use. And I think if I put myself again in customers' shoes, I think we've all been locked down. I've been sort of homeschooling. I was overseeing year 4 maths this morning. It's kind of been one of those moments where everyone's doing a million different things. And I think we probably need to do a bit more hard work for some of our customers that we talk to, making their lives a bit more simpler and easier. And I think part of me thinks that the customers that we talk to don't really care about our brands as much as we think they do, or as much as we do. So how can we kind of make their lives easier? How can we kind of bring them closer without kind of jargonizing them? And I think one of the things that's struck me when I've been doing a bit of online shopping over the last few months is the number of brands every time I go and buy something online that try and interrupt my purchase journey by trying to get me to sign up for a newsletter. Right? I know data capture is super important. We all want huge emailable databases, but actually there's not many brands out there where I can go and buy something without being pestered for handing over my data. And I don't think customers want to do that, right? So I know it's important for data, but why do we do that? So let's be clearer in some of the actions that we take, and let's be more customer focused, I think, probably. And there's lots of industry examples from the companies that I work in, where we can probably do a lot more of that in terms of making customers' lives easier, putting ourselves in their shoes, and just putting a journey together that sort of brings them nearer, really, I think. Point 4 would be about being a bit more useful. So actually, there's lots of digital channels. We've all spent our life on Zoom and Teams and various other kind of Google-based platforms as well over the last 6 months. But point 4 for me would be, how can we kind of use those channels to be really useful? And I think that's where certainly Renault and the brands that sit within Groupe Renault are able to make the biggest difference, particularly at a time when our dealerships are closed at the moment. We've got some really good kind of digital inventory that we're really, really pushing. That can help to kind of bridge that gap between physical premises and digital kind of experiences, which is great. And then I think the fifth and final thing for me is about I've probably quite pompously called it taking anti-social media into social media. But I think, social media for me at the moment is one of those areas that's full of great stuff, but also full of bad stuff. I think it's as anti-social as it is social at the moment. If you look at kind of what's in the news and what brands are doing on social, there's some amazing things. There's things around kind of obviously vaccine development and brands kind of offering their premises for people like Brewdog, Tottenham Hotspur offering their premises for vaccine development. And you read that, and then the next thing on my feed is about the chaos happening in America around the election and the stuff happening at the White House. And you kind of think actually there's as much good as there is bad on there at the moment. But there's some really good examples of brands using positivity on social, partly to align to their kind of brand purpose, but also to kind of, I guess, just put some positivity back in the world. I think we could all do with a bit of positivity. So they were really my 5 kind of key points, really, Tom, in terms of what are the 5 levers I think we've got for 2021 to try and be a bit more clever and efficient about the things that we do.
So basically, in your list, you've talked about very like emotional stuff, be exciting, create experiences, but then you've got the left brain stuff, sort of clarity, be useful, be practical, and then this idea of love and putting goodness within social and filling that channel with something that's positive and in the face of all this antisocial stuff. So the way that I see that list is that you've gone for different parts of the brain, a bit of heart, a bit of soul, but a bit of analytics and usefulness. Is that how you operate as a marketer? Is that how you plan your year from a creative perspective? Or is that just what's come from this list?
I think it's definitely an unconscious decision. So it wasn't something I necessarily sat and sort of deconstructed that way. But I think it probably is a little bit about how I kind of operate and kind of my view on the world. I think the kind of warmer stuff about being exciting and kind of engaging customers and engaging people. I think you have to do that. I mean, I think without that, you're really fighting an uphill battle. It sort of doesn't matter how much you spend on kind of lower funnel or I guess more sort of direct or responsive tactics. If people don't love the brand that you have, to a certain extent, the rest of that is sort of a little bit done in vain, to be honest with you. So I think I've always had that belief that you need to engage and excite people first and foremost. I think the second bit is you need to give them a good experience. So when they do come and see you, or when you spend all that time and effort and money sometimes trying to get someone to go to your website, then once you've done that, let's give them the best experience possible. And for me, and I've picked one example there about trying to data capture me before I've managed to buy the product. You wouldn't do that in a shop. I wouldn't queue up at the till in Waitrose or Tesco's to buy something, and then someone comes over and says, "Hey, can I sign you up? I don't want you to buy that. Can I sign you up to get our magazine?" So why do it on digital? It's just common sense, really. They might do, I don't know, but that's certainly not something I've experienced. And I think this sounds really sort of pompous, but the world just needs a bit more positivity at the moment. I think the brands that can bring that will probably have a benefit. Certainly those that can do it in a way that's relevant both to them as a brand and to their customers as well. So I think it wasn't a conscious decision as such, but I kind of think at every point in that kind of customer journey, we probably need to put a little bit more effort in certain steps.
Well, that's a lovely way to finish the podcast, and I'm sorry we have to, but the time is up. So Adam, if someone wants to get in touch with you, how would you like them to do that?
I think probably LinkedIn is the best bet. You can find me on LinkedIn, no problem. My surname isn't spelt with an X; it's Nickson, which normally fools people or tricks people up. But drop me a note on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to reply.
And what makes a great LinkedIn message to you?
It's funny, actually. I was looking at my LinkedIn earlier, actually, in terms of what I've received in the last couple of weeks and over the Christmas period. I think it's something that's got kind of my needs in mind. I get so much stuff on LinkedIn, as we all do, that's probably not very relevant, or they haven't bothered to do a little bit of research in terms of who I am or what I do. So even just 30 seconds research before the message comes over is probably time well spent, because it might save them a job.
Brilliant. That's a lovely bit of advice. Adam, thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That'd just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.